Star Wars The Clone Wars is one of the most essential pieces of Star Wars media ever. It started out when Star Wars was in a bit of a weird place. The prequels just ended, and it would have been a few years before Disney bought Lucasfilm, and no one really knew for sure what the future of Star Wars had. And somehow, out of nowhere, this, at the time, relatively unknown producer named Dave Filoni just decided to make a Star Wars movie. An animated Star Wars movie, which then was like a backdoor pilot to a full-on Star Wars animated series. Now, there has been Star Wars animated series in the past, but this one definitely looked much more professional and much more intrinsic to the Star Wars lore that we all know and love. But the thing is, it is by far the longest running Star Wars TV show out of all of them, and there's been several, many of whom never really got more than 1 or 2 seasons each, but like, this show somehow endured, and it survived cancellation more than once. So yeah, this show has 7 seasons, totaling to well over 100 episodes. So the question for a lot of casual Star Wars fans is, do I need to watch this show? Is this show a must watch? And I'm here to say that yes, this show I would consider something you must watch if you are a Star Wars fan, because in my opinion, and I've just recently rewatched all of it, it has some of the best Star Wars storylines ever. And I'm including the movies in that discussion. When the show hits its peak, it is masterful storytelling. The problem is that with that masterful bit of storytelling, there's also a lot of episodes that, well...
What if I'm dead? What if I died in that shuttle crash and now I'm stuck here in limbo?
Yes. I should have gone with the mechs.
Not so much. So, do I say you have to watch all of it? Probably not. There's definitely a lot of episodes you can skip, but there's also definitely a lot of episodes that I would consider a must-watch, especially in the current Star Wars climate with the Mandalorian series and the Ahsoka series and so many other things coming down the pipeline for Star Wars, particularly with the Filoniverse, as a lot of people are calling it now. Yeah, there are some episodes that are kind of a must-watch, I would say. So, to help clear away some of the confusion around which episodes you should or shouldn't watch, having recently watched it myself, I decided to compile a list of episodes which I personally consider are a must-watch, specifically if you want to fully understand the context behind a lot of the current Star Wars TV shows and certain characters like Cad Bane, Ahsoka Tano, Bo-Katan, among others. And especially if you're looking forward to the upcoming Star Wars movie next year, as of the recording of this video, The Mandalorian and Grogu. So before we get down to it, there is a bit of an honorable mention that I have to talk about, and that is the 2003 2D animated Clone Wars, which is the show that came out between episodes 2 and episode 3, and at the time was sort of considered canon to the Star Wars movies, but since then it sort of isn't canon anymore. Only the 2008 3D animated series is canon, and there is a bit of a controversy over the Clone Wars versus Clone Wars, so yeah, people tend to get upset if you confuse between the two. But even though the show and a lot of the stuff happening in it isn't canon, again, as just as an honorable mention, I would recommend watching it, especially Volume 1, because it does feature the character debut of Asajj Ventress, which is a hugely important character to the Clone Wars, the 3D animated series. And when you first see her in the 3D series, she kind of just drops out of nowhere with barely an introduction. So yeah, I would say watch the first volume of Clone Wars before watching The Clone Wars, just to get a little bit of context as to that character and her relationship with specifically Anakin Skywalker. Also, that show features the character debut of General Grievous, who did actually appear in that show before Revenge of the Sith came out. So there's something there. And it kinda also shows the kidnapping of the Chancellor, which obviously is like the opening sequence of Revenge of the Sith, which the Clone Wars doesn't actually show you. So maybe you consider giving these two volumes a watch. They're only about an hour each, but I promise it's probably worth it. Now, jumping into the Clone Wars series, first of all, we gotta start off with the movie. Star Wars The Clone Wars from 2008, a movie which was very much reviled when it first came out. People have gone back and forth about it since, but I mean, if you think the fan response to The Last Jedi was toxic, you should have seen some of the stuff people said about that Star Wars movie. But I will say this, though. If you already know the character of Ahsoka, you know where she came from, you've seen her in The Mandalorian, you've seen her in Book of Boba Fett, you've seen the Ahsoka series, maybe you can give this movie a pass because, it really just... It's the perfect example of what I've been saying, of some of the highest highs of the show and some of the lowest lows. However, there is a character that shows up in the movie that could be a main center point in The Mandalorian and Grogu. So maybe do give this movie a watch. But I mean, if you already know who the character of Ahsoka is, and again, at the time of this recording, I haven't seen the Mandalorian and Grogu movie yet, because it hasn't come out yet. So maybe it's not as important as I'm making it out to be. So you probably shouldn't watch. You probably can skip the movie, for starters. Now, jumping into season 1, this season, oddly enough, has arguably the highest number of skippable episodes in the entire show. Now, I'm not saying that all the episodes are bad or not worth watching. I'm just saying a lot of those episodes, most of them are really good, but they're not what I would consider a must-watch, you cannot miss for this series, specifically if you're looking to gain some more knowledge on some of the other stuff happening in Star Wars moving forward. The first episode I would say you should watch from this season is episode 16, The Hidden Enemy. First of all, because chronologically speaking, it is the first appearance of Asajj Ventress in this show, which I mentioned earlier, but yeah, she's just thrown in there, and you have to assume that she has a past with Obi-Wan and Anakin, which you just don't know about because that's kind of her first appearance on this show, if you haven't watched Clone Wars, the 2D animated series, but also because this episode really does focus heavily on the clones. In particular, Commander Cody, which you've already seen in the movies, but also Captain Rex, which is my personal favorite clone out of the entire Star Wars saga, but also he's essential to Star Wars, and in particular, this show. So, The Hidden Enemy is probably the most important episode from season 1 you have to watch. And then, right from there, you go straight to the final episode of the season, episode 22, Hostage Crisis. Now, there's not too much anything interesting happening in the episode itself, except for the fact that this episode introduces some very important characters to the show, in particular, Cad Bane. This was his official debut in the show, not so much in chronological order, but that's a whole other thing to talk about. That's a whole other video that I need to make. But yeah, this is his debut, and this is also the official animated debut of Aura Singh, which has been mentioned by name in Solo: A Star Wars Story and kinda seen in The Phantom Menace. But yeah, her and Cad Bane are two of the main characters you probably should follow in this show. And that's kinda it for season 1. Although one thing that I will give sort of another honorable mention is the Ryloth arc. Episode 19, Storm over Ryloth. Episode 20, Innocence of Ryloth. And episode 21, Liberty on Ryloth. Now, these episodes don't actually connect to anything in the live-action Star Wars series, but they do connect to some of the other animated series, particularly The Bad Batch and Rebels. So if you're interested in watching those, you should probably give these episodes a watch as well. Moving into season 2, we start off with another possible honorable mention, episode 10, The Deserter. I wouldn't say it's a must-watch, but again, it ties into The Bad Batch. So if you want to watch that series as well, you should probably give this one a look as well. Next up is easily the most important batch of episodes on this list so far, and kind of the reason I decided to make this list in the first place, particularly the first episode in this batch of episodes, episode 12, The Mandalore Plot. If you couldn't already tell by the name, this episode heavily focuses on Mandalore, and having recently rewatched it myself, it is crazy how much connectivity this episode has to the Mandalorian series in just one episode. Now, the other two episodes following it, episode 13, Voyage of Temptation, and episode 14, Duchess of Mandalore, are also important. I would say not quite as important as episode 12, but I would still say you should probably watch them to get a better understanding of the Mandalorian storyline from the Mandalorian series onward. I would say episode 13 is almost skippable, but I mean, you kind of have to watch it to get context for episode 14. So yeah, if I were to rank them in order of importance, it would be episode 12, The Mandalore Plot, episode 14, Duchess of Mandalore, and episode 13, Voyage of Temptation. But you should probably watch all three regardless. Now, jumping back into The Mandalorian and Grogu for a second, I have no way of confirming this, but I'm pretty sure that a certain character introduced in season 2 of the Clone Wars will be a main focal point in the Mandalorian Grogu movie, and he first appears in episode 17, Bounty Hunters. Now, I wouldn't necessarily call this episode a must-watch, but do keep in mind that this character does show up in a couple of other episodes as well, one of which is on this list regardless. So, again, honorable mention, but not a must-watch. Speaking of honorable mentions that are not must-watches, there are two episodes next that do fall into that category. Episode 18, The Zelo Beast, and episode 18, The Zelo Beast Strikes Back. Now again, not a must-watch, but they do heavily connect to The Bad Batch in a weird way that I will talk about if I end up doing the same list for The Bad Batch as well. So stay tuned for that. The final three episodes of this season, episode 20, Death Trap, episode 21, R2 Come Home, and episode 22, Lethal Trackdown, do tend to heavily focus on Boba Fett as a young child, which I wouldn't necessarily consider them must-watches because you kind of already know everything you need to know about Boba Fett from the movies and obviously the live-action series, but again, give those episodes a consideration. They're not must-watches, but they should at least be considered. Moving into season 3, there's another potential honorable mention on this list, episode 10, Heroes on Both Sides. This episode isn't specifically tied to any other series going forward, but it does set up a certain character that comes up later in this show, which is tied to storylines that do eventually tie back into the live-action series. So again, a consideration, but not a must-watch. What is a must-watch are the next three episodes that I'm going to mention. Episode 12, Night Sisters, Episode 13, Monster, and Episode 14, Witches of the Mist. Now, if you've been paying attention, and I hope you have, I've mentioned the character of Asajj Ventress a couple of times. This is probably her most pivotal moment in the show's history. This, obviously, you probably may have already known about this character as sort of a Sith assassin and an apprentice of Count Dooku. This is kind of the episode where she goes on a different path. And this episode also introduces a new character, Savage Opress, who, and this is a major spoiler, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I don't know why you're even watching this, but a major spoiler, he's kind of, sort of, the brother of Darth Maul. And this ties heavily into how Darth Maul came back into the Star Wars universe. And that part isn't a spoiler because he's already in Solo, a Star Wars story. So you probably may have already known about that. But if you want to know the story of how Maul came back into the Star Wars galaxy, you gotta watch these 3 episodes. Now, the next batch of episodes are episodes that, for casual viewers, could be considered a bit of a tough watch. But judging by the way Ahsoka Season 1 ended, and the possible plans for Season 2, I would say these episodes could be considered a must-watch. But again, remember, these are a bit incredibly high concept, especially for Star Wars casual fans, as opposed to hardcore fans. And these episodes are, of course, the Mortis trilogy. Episode 15, Overlords. Episode 16, Altar of Mortis. And Episode 17, Ghosts of Mortis. There's like a whole bunch of crazy stuff happening in these episodes that, could be a bit too inside baseball to some people, could fly over people's heads sometimes, but I hope watching these will make a lot of things make sense regarding where the possible Season 2 of Ahsoka is going to go. Episode 4 is in a bit of a weird spot because, on the one hand, I do think it has some of the best episodes, some of the best storylines, and yet most of them are skippable and not, essential must watches for the purpose of this video. So we're gonna skip all the way to episode 14, A Friend in Need, which heavily ties into the Mandalorian plot and also kind of justifies you watching episode 10 of season 3, Heroes on Both Sides, because the character introduced in that episode makes a huge return in this episode as well. But yeah, A Friend in Need, episode 14, a must watch. Now the next 2 episodes I would say are, again, under recommendation, but not a must watch. And these are episodes 19, Massacre, and episode 20, Bounty. These episodes focus heavily on Asajj Ventress, who does come up later in the series. So if you want to know what happened to her, you should probably watch them. But again, not must watches. What I do consider to be must watches are episode 21, Brothers, and episode 22, Revenge. These are the 2 episodes that heavily focus on Darth Maul, or rather just Maul, as he's going to be called from now on. And these episodes are essential to watching the rest of the series, particularly because they are directly followed by episode 1 of season 5, Revival, another must-watch for the series. Speaking of season 5, this season is controversial in terms of this list specifically. It does have some essential characters, but I wouldn't necessarily consider the episodes they feature in that must-watch-y. And starting with the first episode arc of the season, episode 2, A War on Two Fronts, episode 3, Front Runners, episode 4, The Soft War, and episode 5, Tipping Points. These 4 episodes heavily focus on the planet Onderon, and while what happens on Onderon isn't too important to the rest of the Star Wars galaxy, a certain main character from those episodes is, and that is, of course, the character of Saw Gerrera, which was heavily featured in both Rogue One, the Andor series, and the video game Jedi Fallen Order. He's actually one of the major characters in Star Wars that just randomly sprung from this batch of episodes. Again, not must-watches, but they're kind of important to Saw Gerrera's character. So again, under consideration. And then the next batch of episodes are some of the episodes that normally I would say skip if it wasn't for the fact that they feature something that's very important to the Jedi lore and a character heavily featured in the Ahsoka series, Hu Yang. And these 4 episodes are episode 6, The Gathering, episode 7, A Test of Strength, episode 8, Bound for Rescue, and episode 9, A Necessary Bond. Now, again, normally I tell you to skip, maybe just watch the opening few minutes of The Gathering and just the opening few minutes of A Test of Strength and just skip the rest of the episodes, because these are the types of episodes that, really heavily emphasize the point of this show was made for children, but adults can still enjoy it as well. But I mean, it is a kids show after all. So if it makes any sense to you, good, because somehow I confused myself on that one. And yet somehow we're back to the must watches, and this is probably the most must watch out of any must watch, minus the finale, of course. Episode 14, Eminence, episode 15, Shades of Reason, and episode 16, The Lawless. And I apologize for spoiling, but this is where the Maul storyline and the Mandalore storyline converge, and I can't really quite say how or why because that would be a spoiler. Just know that these episodes are probably the most important to watch on this list so far. Again, we still got the finale coming. And immediately after that, we have another episodic arc, which I would say is a must watch. However, you can skip the first of these. Episode 17, Sabotage. You don't necessarily have to watch it. You can just skip to episode 18, The Jedi Who Knew Too Much, and then move on to episode 19, To Catch a Jedi, and episode 20, The Wrong Jedi. These are the episodes that are arguably the most important to Ahsoka Tano's character, and primarily explain why she wasn't around in Revenge of the Sith. There's a whole complicated list of things that happen in between that, but these are the episodes that are must watch for Ahsoka Tano. Season 6 is almost completely skippable. Again, if you don't have any plans on seeing The Bad Batch, I would say you can skip the season altogether. But if you are planning on watching The Bad Batch, you should at least watch the first episode arc for the season. Episode 1, The Unknown. Episode 2, Conspiracy. Episode 3, Fugitive. And episode 4, Orders. Now, again, under consideration, but not must watches. Again, like I said, you could probably skip all of season 6, but if you're one of those people who are exceptionally interested in the Force and the lore of the Jedi, you should at least consider watching the final episodic arc in the season. Episode 10, The Lost Ones. Episode 11, Voices. Episode 12, Destiny. And episode 13, Sacrifice. These episodes get weird. I mean very weird. If you think the Mortis episodes were weird, these episodes take it into a whole other level. I mean, it's full on Alice in Wonderland weird in Star Wars. Again, if you're that interested in the Force, watch these episodes, but if not, skip the entire season overall. Although I will say, these episodes do kind of explain why Yoda decided to go to exile on Dagobah as opposed to any other planet. So if you're interested in that, at least, give these episodes a watch. But like I said, you could probably skip this entire season and you wouldn't miss much. Now, some of these episodes in this season are pretty good, but, like, if you're not really interested in connective tissue to the live-action series, you don't need to watch these. And now we're on to the final season, season 7, and I've been talking about The Bad Batch so many times during this list that we finally actually get to the episode that introduced them. Now again, if you are planning on watching the Bad Batch series, you should watch these 4 episodes, but if not, you can skip them. And these are, of course, episode 1, The Bad Batch, episode 2, A Distant Echo, episode 3, On the Wings of Kiradux, and episode 4, Unfinished Business. Again, this is only if you're interested in watching The Bad Batch. You don't have to watch these episodes for any of the live-action series. The episodes that are a must watch for any Star Wars fan, and the reason why this show even got a 7th series in the first place are the final episodes, which, put all together, are treated like an actual movie. Like they are Star Wars movie quality, just in animation. And these are episode 9, Old Friends Not Forgotten, episode 10, Phantom Apprentice, episode 11, Shattered, and episode 12, Victory and Death. These episodes directly take place during Revenge of the Sith and are heavily tied to the events of that movie in such a way where you can pause at certain moments of Revenge of the Sith, jump into these episodes, and then jump back to Revenge of the Sith, back and forth, because these episodes are just happening concurrently with the movie. So, yeah, these episodes are easily the most important out of all the episodes on this list. However, a lot of the must-watches on the list that I've already mentioned are must-watches to understanding the context of these episodes. So, yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted mess, but that's really the important part. Now, I should probably mention that you might need a bit of context for these episodes that can be found in the previous episodic arc. Episode 5, Gone with a Trace. Episode 6, Deal No Deal. Episode 7, Dangerous Debt. And episode 8, Together Again. Now, these episodes are not good, in my opinion. Kind of makes you wonder why they decided to put these episodes in this season as opposed to some other episodes you didn't get a chance to put in the season, but I digress. Again, these episodes have some connectivity with the Bad Batch, but minor at best, and they do kind of set up the finale, but you can easily skip them and go straight into the finale and you wouldn't miss a thing. Mostly. But overall, definitely not must-watches. And there you have it. These are all the episodes that I believe are a must-watch for any Star Wars fan from Star Wars The Clone Wars. Now, these are just my recommendations for these episodes. You can watch the entire series overall, and please do, because it's a wonderful, wonderful piece of Star Wars media. But again, if you're just interested in the live action stuff, do check out just the episodes which I categorized under the must-watch category and nothing else. And do consider watching some of the other episodes I said under recommendation. But again, if you're just in it for the live action series and the upcoming movies, the must-watches are all you really need. So, thank you for watching, and let me know if you thought this list was helpful, and stay tuned for a potential follow-up on the Bad Batch and Rebels series as well. So, till then, may the Force be with you, always. Hi there! Thank you for watching the video, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and tell your friends. I'll see you next time.